Our first reading comes from the book of Matthew. In the Bible, it's the very first page of the New Testament, a little more than halfway through there. Give you a moment to catch in. We're going to the second chapter of Matthew, verses 1 through 12. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star in the east and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him, and calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, 'And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler, who is the shepherd my people Israel.'" Then Herod secretly called for the Magi and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there, ahead of them, went the star that they had seen in the east, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. The second reading today comes as an excerpt from the letter from Birmingham Jail by Martin Luther King Jr. You may well ask, why direct action? Why sit-ins, marches, etc.? Isn't negotiation a better path? You are quite right in calling for negotiation. Indeed, this is the very purpose of direct action. Nonviolent direct action seeks to foster such a tension that a community which has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. My friends, I must say to you that we have not made a single gain in civil rights without legal and nonviolent pressure. Lamentably, it is a historical fact that privileged groups seldom give up their privileges voluntarily. Individuals may see the moral light and voluntarily give up their unjust posture. But as Reinhold Niebuhr has reminded us, groups tend to be more immoral than individuals. We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have not yet to engage in a direct action campaign that was well-timed in the view of those who have not suffered unduly for the disease of segregation. For years now, I have heard the words, "wait." It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. As one of the distinguished jurists once said, "Justice too long delayed is justice denied." I must make two honest confessions to you, my Christian and Jewish brothers. First, I must confess that over the last few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate I have also reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to the order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods, who patronistically feels he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection.
Friends, will you pray with me? And as you feel so familiar and comfortable, I invite you to join in the second time through. Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O God. Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O God. Amen. Earlier this month, when thinking about this Sunday between Epiphany and my vacation and our annual meeting, it's sort of this nebulous, what season is it? We're not really sure. What are we doing? It's the weekend of Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Tomorrow is also, as we all know, the Sunday before that date, which has been looming ahead of us, January 20th, and all the events which shall take place tomorrow. And I had an idea for something a little bit different, something to do with the book of Jonah. But I decided to postpone that because I was reading some sort of meditation, and I don't remember where it was. But it was on this passage from Matthew, this passage that comes up at Epiphany, that we read, sort of closes out our Christmas season. And it said, the Magi, in disobeying Herod, were practicing civil disobedience. And I was like, oh, totally right. Never thought of it that before. We always know, Herod's telling them one thing, Magi doing another. I always think of Neil. I was talking about this with Robbie. I said, what does Neil tell you to do as the guards? What does Neil tell everyone? Go find the child, so I also may worship. And I asked Robbie, and does anyone come back? No, because everybody knows that Herod's intentions are not, in fact, to worship the child. And so the Magi disobey. They disobey the authority and the power. And yet, that part of the story sort of gets forgotten or brushed aside or sort of, and they went home by another road. Off they went. We are entering a time. I want to say maybe entering is not right. We are in a time. We are taking the next step on a journey in this time where it is very possible that we are going to have to go by another road. Where those in power and authority and government are going to make statements, put forth laws, do all kinds of things which are morally, ethically, faithfully, repugnant might be the strong word, disagreeable. Will not be the first time. But I was struck very much by Dr. King's familiar passages from the letter from Birmingham Jail. And that second part, I think, is also another one that sort of gets brushed aside and forgotten. About the white moderate. About the desire for order. About waiting until the proper time. About not creating discomfort or chaos. Because it sounds really familiar. Because we've been there. We've heard that message from all kinds of people. Well-meaning people who want peace in the world and justice and equality, but who really wish it could just happen in a very quiet and orderly fashion. Maybe on a weekday, between the hours of 9 and 5. But we've talked about that before, because that's not how powers fall. We have to be willing to take another road, to speak out, to put our own privilege and well-being and reputations on the line for the betterment of society. I love the way he phrases the peace with a lack of tension. Because, man, I think that's exactly what people want. People want peace that comes from, like when you can all sit around the Thanksgiving table and there's no arguments. Like that kind of peace. Rather than a peace that comes from hungry people being fed and freedom from violence and war and equal opportunity. I had an experience this week, and many of you, I'm sure, who are on Facebook or on the town Facebook page in particular, were privy to this little hubbub that went on. For those of you who were not and are not on that, Mondays are when the town allows businesses and nonprofits to make announcements about events or offerings that we have. So on Monday, I posted an announcement about a new support group that we are hosting, which I am leading, from this congregation, doing the vestry. It's a monthly support group for the parents and other family members of transgender and gender non-conforming people. Here's an announcement. I let people know, although it's hosted by the church, led by me, it's a secular group, anyone is welcome. Monday night, the first comment hit. Right before I was going to go to bed, so I did not respond, because it was not a nice comment. When I woke up on Tuesday, there were many more comments. There were reported comments, which were filled with hate speech. There was back and forth happening with people in the town. Now, I will admit that when I said parents of, I didn't say people, I said parents of transgender children. I said of all ages, but apparently people didn't quite get that, and they thought I meant actual juveniles, which would be fine, but this is what people focused on. But there was a lot of, this is not something the church should be doing. The church should not involve themselves in this. And granted, there were lots of people who said, the church is about love. This is about loving people. But there was a lot of response back that said, this is not love. To, feed into this, forget what they call this sort of, ideology. And two, even if it is love, it is not something the church should be doing. Now, when I responded, I did preface my comments always by saying, this is Reverend Beth, so that people know where it's coming from. But I spoke from the profile of the church. So I was speaking on behalf of all of you, of all of us, and responding back, pushing back, and making clear that this was, in fact, something that was very much in keeping with the message of the church and of Jesus. It was uncomfortable. It was hard. And it was absolutely necessary. And I think we're going to see a whole lot more of that in the coming years. Where people are saying and doing things. And we as individuals and as a congregation are going to have to take deep breaths, push aside our desire for a peace that comes without tension, and lean into speaking out and speaking up. And yes, there may be times when that involves disobeying rules and laws. I hope it doesn't come to that. But it might. I don't know about all of you, but I grew up in a middle-class household. I was very much against breaking rules. We were talking yesterday, actually, at our, lunch table or dinner table. At some point we were sitting around and we were talking about what detention is. You know, my kids are homeschooled. They don't know what detention is. So we were talking about detention. And I was sitting there with my mom, and I didn't say it. My mom's sitting there eating lunch with us too, or eating a meal. And I was thinking to myself, if I had come home having gotten a detention, I don't even know. My 7th grade homeroom teacher, true story, I had the hiccup. When I get the hiccups, I get them very loudly, not intentionally. Matt thinks it's hilarious. He doesn't hiccup at all. I get them, and they're super loud. I had hiccups in homeroom in 7th grade. And my homeroom teacher said to me, "You hiccup one more time, I'm giving you a detention." And then she called me up a few minutes later and she said, "Did it work?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" She's like, "Did it scare the hiccups out of you?" It's like, "You gave me a heart attack. It's like I see the hiccups. Are you kidding me?" But that's the world I grew up in. You don't break the rules. And in many cases, it was even if they're unjust rules, follow the rules. But unfortunately, all that does is enforce unjust rules and an unjust world and keep the oppressors where they are. It is very easy to look back at history and say that we would have been on the right side, that we would have spoken up. That if we were living in Germany in the 1930s and 40s, we would have been hiding people, or we would have been speaking out, or we would have been putting ourselves on the line. That if we were living in a time of legal slavery, we would have been speaking out with the abolitionists. I'm doing a little research, and I've got to do a little bit more digging. But I hope you all know that this church was not on the right side of that history. At least, not everyone. The pastor was not. And in fact, the pastor, when there was a group of abolitionists coming into town to do a kind of rally. Now remember, this is the meeting house, right? So this was a gathering for town purposes, not strictly for the church. So when there was a rally coming in, traveling group, bringing their abolitionist message to different towns, and they used this space, the pastor at the time promised to rescind the membership of any church member found to be present at the rally or to house any person visiting out of town for that rally. And he made good on his promise. And there's a list of people that he kicked out of church. It is true. It is true. It is true. I've seen the archives. I have the papers. I have looked at them. Fascinating. Like I said, I'm doing some more research. It's easy to look back from our positions now and say, of course, if Herod had told me, I would have disobeyed and taken another road. But we know the truth is it's not always that easy. It's not always easy to stand up to our neighbors. To our friends, to our family. We remember that in the Civil War, right? Brothers fighting against brothers. Families were literally split in who they were fighting for and what they were fighting for. It happens. But we have to be ready. And to know, to use another phrase of Dr. King, the arc of justice is long. The arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. We are part of that. And it is our decisions that help that arc bend towards or away from justice. We don't do it alone. We do it in community. I think the church is going to be a place where we can come and find solidarity when this way is hard and anxiety-producing and infuriating. And God is also with us. It does not mean we are protected from earthly harm in that accompaniment. But the presence stays. And so being faithful, understanding God's ways are just, and God's desire for the world is justice, can help us, encourage us to turn from the oppressors and go home